The courtroom was suffocating with silence, the kind that coils tight around your throat, thick with expectation, heavy with judgment, and then cutting through it like a lightning bolt. Across still skies came a voice no one expected. "I will defend her in court." Heads jerked, brows furrowed. Disbelief rippled through the packed federal courtroom like a storm gathering momentum. It wasn't a polished attorney or a sharp-suited executive who spoke. It was a man in coveralls, a janitor, mop still dripping onto the marble floor, gloves damp with bleach and courage. "You're not authorized to be here," the bailiff barked, already stepping forward. But the janitor held his ground. His voice came again, steadier now, louder. "I said, I will defend her." Gasps, a few snickers. Somewhere in the gallery, someone whispered, lost on his way to the janitor's closet, "I guess." The judge, a man of gravitas with silver hair and a gavel that really needed to speak for him, peered over his glasses. "Name, Jacob Lane. Your Honor, and your legal representation for Miss Storm." At the defendant's table sat Vivian Storm, a woman forged of steel and spotlight, the billionaire tech magnate who had graced magazine covers and led empires. But today, she sat alone, the chair beside her meant for her high-profile defense. Attorney stood hollow, abandoned. She turned slowly, as if the weight of the moment pressed against her spine. Her gaze met Jacob's, her composure impeccably elegant, deeply furious, fractured. "You," she whispered. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am, the janitor, still AM. But I also know what they're trying to do to you." Laughter buzzed again through the room. The prosecution chuckled. The spectacle was just beginning. "Mr. Lane," the judge interrupted, dry and sharp. "Are you licensed to practice law?" "No, sir," Jacob admitted plainly. "Studied at NYU Law. Dropped out second year. Life happened. But I've been studying law ever since. And this case," he raised a thick folder, stuffed with tabs, notes, and battle-worn pages. "This case I know inside and out." A beat of silence. Then Marshal Kent, the prosecutor, stood with a cocky smirk. "Your Honor, we're turning the federal courtroom into amateur hour." "I'm not her lawyer," Jacob said, eyes steady. "She doesn't have one. Not today. But the court still has to hear the facts." Vivian Storm could have shut it all down right there. Could have refused the gesture. Could have torn him apart with words like she did at boardrooms around the world. But she didn't. Something flickered in her expression. Not trust, not gratitude, something deeper, something uncertain. She turned to the judge. "Let him speak." The gavel hit. One hearing, the judge declared, "Mr. Lane, proceed." Jacob stepped forward, removed his gloves slowly, methodically, as if shedding the skin the world had always seen him in. He didn't flinch under the stares. He'd faced worse in grief, in isolation, in silence. His voice rang out clear and grounded. On March 7th, Stormtech was accused of falsifying a joint venture amendment with Ravenmark Capital. The prosecution says the revised signature came from Miss Storm's office. He paused, flipped a tab, but the metadata tells another story. The digital fingerprint traces back to Zurich. The formatting European legal phrasing not in line with any U.S. document produced by Stormtech's team. And more, here's the SEC filing dated weeks before the so-called revision. It confirms the original contract was still valid. Gasps turned into murmurs. Kent stood again, protesting, objection. "This janitor is not an expert. It's not opinion," Jacob said firmly. "It's code, raw data. You can test it yourself." Vivian turned to him again, her stare cutting. Confused, calculating. For the first time, she really looked at him. No longer a background figure. No longer invisible. He was standing in the abyss between her and ruin. He hadn't blinked. "Mr. Lane," the judge asked after a long pause, "what is your connection to the defendant?" "I clean her floors," Jacob replied simply, "every night." For 3 years, the courtroom stirred. The judge rubbed his temple, then called a recess. "We'll reconvene tomorrow. The court will review Mr. Lane's evidence." As the gallery buzzed, Jacob turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Lane." He faced her. Vivian approached slowly, heels quiet on marble. I don't know what this is, she said, her voice low. But if you embarrass me again, I won't. He cut in. I already did. She blinked, caught off guard. Then I guess tomorrow's your chance to fix it. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. And with that, he walked out, mopless, but not without purpose, outside the courthouse. Jacob sat alone, the folder spread open like scripture across his lap. Wind flicked at the corners. His daughter's voice echoed from the night before. You're not a janitor. Daddy, you're just undercover. He chuckled softly, eyes on the skyline. The city loomed like Vivian herself, cold, distant, invulnerable. But now, maybe, not so untouchable. Mr. Lane. He looked up. She stood there, Vivian Storm, alone, without entourage or press, in a coat black as midnight. You went off script, she said. I didn't have a script. He replied, just the truth. She sat beside him. A silence bloomed between them, filled with traffic and time. Then, why, she asked. He looked at his hands. Because I know what silence does to people, how it drowns you. And I saw what they were doing. You didn't look guilty. You looked cornered. Her eyes narrowed. You read my draft contract? Yes. You know that's dangerous. Yeah, he said, soft. But I stopped being afraid a long time ago. And then unexpectedly she laughed. It wasn't elegant. It was raw, real. It caught her by surprise. You don't know what you've stepped into. Not yet. But I'm good at cleaning messes. A beat passed. Then she asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Why didn't anyone see this? Why didn't anyone warn me? He met her eyes. Because when you build empires on brilliance, people assume you can't fall. When the cracks come, they just take cover. She looked away, face shadowed. Then maybe it's time someone stood in the gap. He said dot as they walked. She revealed the truth. Her legal team hadn't bailed. They were bought or bullied. Whoever was behind this had expected resistance, but not from someone like him. You're not what I expected, she said at last. I get that a lot. She paused before leaving. Bring the folder tomorrow, and wear something less janitorial. Jacob grinned. I'll try not to stain my khakis with justice. Her lips twitched. Not a smile, but close. Back home in Queens, Jacob entered the dim apartment. His daughter looked up from the table, where she'd drawn a picture of him holding a folder like a shield. Did you win? She asked. Not yet, he said, kneeling. But I might have started something. You're like Iron Man. She beamed, but with paper. He kissed her forehead. Sleep, baby girl. Tomorrow we fight again. And as the city whispered through the cracks in the window, Jacob Lane, widow janitor, accidental advocate, father and fighter sat at the table, highlighter in hand, the folder open like a sacred text, preparing dot because sometimes the truth isn't found in court filings or security teams. Sometimes it lives in the hands that clean the floor beneath giants, and sometimes the ones no one sees are the ones who save us. He hadn't done it for applause, not for the limelight, nor for validation. Jacob Lane moved in silence, not seeking glory, but driven by a quiet, unrelenting conviction because the system had cracks and someone had to mop up the truth before it vanished like suds down a corporate drain. The truth survived because a shredder failed. 3 weeks earlier, on the 42nd floor of Stormtech's gleaming tower, lemon-scented disinfectant still clung to the air as Jacob's mop bucket rested just outside the executive suite. He had just emptied the paper bin when the blinking red light of the office shredder caught his eye. Overheated, jammed, bloated with paper like it had eaten too much deception and couldn't digest it. He opened the machine. Crumpled sheets, some half-shredded, others untouched, spilled out. One page wedged between the thick contracts glinted beneath the fluorescent light. A draft marked confidential amendment. Something about it felt off. Jacob wasn't supposed to read it. He'd never read these things, but after years cleaning, corporate corridors and boardrooms long after their occupants had gone home, the patterns had become familiar fonts, margins, the tempo of legalese. This one, though, felt foreign, European, cold dot without hesitation. He slipped the draft into a plastic sleeve, slid it beneath the false bottom of his mop cart, and went home. That night, while his daughter Emily nestled beneath her covers, Jacob brewed a bitter pot of gas station coffee and leaned into the glow of his old lamp. Red pen in hand, eyes tired but locked in, he read and reread the draft, line by line, word by word. 3 weeks later, the folder was his strongest weapon. The courthouse smelled of wood polish, dust, and nerves. Jacob walked in with his sleeves rolled up, a navy shirt tucked neatly, and the same folder held tight to his chest like a soldier carrying a letter from the front. A security guard gave him a double take, but let him pass. Maybe it was the shirt. Maybe it was the fire in his eyes, the kind born of someone who had nothing left to fear and everything to lose. Vivian Storm was already inside, poised, immaculate, dressed like power incarnate, a tablet glowing softly in her hand. She looked up when Jacob entered. Their eyes met, and this time, she didn't look away. The gallery was more crowded now. News crews, analysts, executives from across the financial world. The scent of blood had drawn the wolves. Prosecutor Marshall Kent gave Jacob a glance filled with disdain, thinly veiled by curiosity. Back for round 2, he murmured. Jacob didn't break stride. Don't worry, counselor. I brought a mop in case the truth makes a mess. Kent scoffed, but said nothing. The judge entered, grave and unreadable. The gavel fell. Court is now in session. Jacob stepped forward and placed a fresh copy of the draft amendment before the clerk, alongside a printed version of the SEC filing. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady as granite. The prosecution claims Miss Storm altered the joint venture agreement with Ravenmark Capital to hide a conflict of interest. But this document, he tapped the amendment, was not written by her team. The judge adjusted his glasses. Your basis for this conclusion? Jacob turned a page. Calm and exact. First the format, the spacing, the legal structuring. Footnotes, all mere European legal templates. I cross-referenced them against samples from Zurich-based firms. Second metadata. He handed the judge a printed screenshot. The file was signed from an IP in Zurich, not from StormTech servers. Kent rose sharply. Objection. Without a verified chain of custody, this is inadmissible. Jacob met his challenge without flinching. The court can verify independently. I've submitted the digital copy to the clerk, complete with timestamps and machine ID. If Miss Storm had authorized this, her system would have left the fingerprint. It didn't. The judge turned to the clerk, who gave a curt nod. Preliminary verification confirms a foreign IP trail. A low ripple moved through the courtroom. Gasps, whispers. Vivian's gaze never left Jacob. She stared at the back of his head as if trying to map the invisible roads. That had brought a janitor to her defense table. Kent tried once more. Your Honor, this whole theory hinges on the assumption that Miss Storm didn't authorize the signature. Exactly. Jacob interrupted. So the real question is who did? The room fell into silence. Vivian stood. Your Honor, she said, her voice firm. I request a sealed side conference regarding digital credentials, specifically access granted during my overseas travel, and former personnel who held temporary clearance. Granted, the judge said. Court will recess until 1 p.m. The gavel struck dot as the room emptied. Vivian approached Jacob. You held onto that document. She said quietly, you held onto your silence. He replied. She studied him for a beat. You keep surprising me. I've had practice. He said, tucking the folder away. The world underestimates men who mop floors. I've been guilty of that. She murmured, barely audible. Then maybe that's where we start. Jacob said gently, with what people didn't see. She turned, then paused. Do you remember who had access to your Zurich credentials? She froze. My former assistant. She said, Paul Temple. He managed my overseas documentation, resigned suddenly. No warning. Before or after the second inquiry. After. Jacob's jaw tightened. Then I'd start there. That evening, Jacob sat on his threadbare couch, one hand on his phone. the other scrolling through an open laptop. On the screen, Paul Temple's LinkedIn profile, last known title Executive Assistant, Storm Tech, last activity 2 months ago. Then, silence. Jacob whispered into the stillness. Someone left the back door open and a storm blew in. Emma was curled nearby in her blanket, coloring with sleepy eyes. He looked at her, and the world softened. "Want me to read something?" he asked. She nodded. He pulled a worn paperback from the shelf. To Kill a Mockingbird. His voice warmed. The air as he read, but his thoughts were miles away, locked on the man who vanished, and the woman who, for the first time, had looked at him like he mattered. Outside, the city flickered beneath tired neon lights. Somewhere, a door shut softly. But Jacob Lane now knew something vital. The truth doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes, it hides in a half-shredded page, waiting patiently for someone willing to pick it up. "I don't need saving, Mr. Lane." Vivian's voice was smooth, but behind it trembled something brittle like stained glass before the break. "I'm not here to save you," Jacob said, standing beside the floor-to-ceiling window in her office. "I'm here to stop them from burying you while you're still breathing." The city behind him stretched in arrogant steel and glass, gleaming under the weight of power. The executive floor was quiet, all meetings canceled, just the two of them, suspended in tension. Vivian sat at her desk, every movement precise, every word calculated. "So, what's your theory? You were overseas. Someone revised the contracts. Someone who had your key." "Paul," she said, her voice almost a breath. "He had access, passwords, tokens, everything, and I never changed them." Jacob laid a paper on her desk. "What is it?" "Expense records. Paul booked a hotel in Zurich during the week your signature appeared on the fake document." "He wasn't on that trip." "No, but the signature was. They forged it in plain sight, banking on no one looking far enough down to see it." Her hands clenched. "He betrayed me. He opened the back door. Someone else walked through." Vivian rose and pressed her palm against the glass. "When I was 10, she said softly, my father brought me to a courthouse. I'd been mocked at school for wearing second-hand clothes. He sat beside me and said, 'Viv, the world sees power like it sees money, loud, fast, untouchable. But real power, it's quiet. It waits, and when it speaks, people listen.' She turned. To him, "Eyes stormy. I built this company. I didn't marry into it. I fought for every inch. And now someone's trying to throw me out of my own house. Then let's check every room before they lock the doors." She nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "Access. Paul's office, his backups, his files, anything untouched." She hesitated, then pulled a keycard from her drawer. "Second floor. Archives." He accepted it. "You should check your board, too." Her brows lifted. "Excuse me, people. This bold don't act alone." Her expression changed. "Not fear fortification." The steel slid into place. "And what about you, Mr. Lane? Why are you really doing this?" Jacob met her gaze. "Because one night, my daughter asked me why good. People always lose. I want to show her they don't. Not if they stand up." Vivian swallowed hard. "She's lucky to have you." "No," he whispered. "I'm lucky to have her. She gave me a reason to keep showing up, even when I didn't recognize the man." In the mirror, the archive room was cold, forgotten, steeped in dust and a set of sealed secrets. Jacob stepped in quietly, keycard in hand. Paul Temple's office sat untouched, drawers stiff with disuse. The top ones held nothing but remnants of routine staplers, faded post-it notes, empty pens. But the bottom drawer stuck. Jacob tugged harder. It grown open. Inside sat a black leather planner, heavy, worn, important. He opened it. Meetings, client names, dinner notes, and maybe, just maybe, the thread that would unravel the whole design. Because when giants fall, it's often the janitor who heard the crack before anyone else noticed the tremble. Then, pressed between the stiff pages of a planner marked week of April 10th, Jacob Lane found it, a yellow sticky note, faded at the edges, but alive with meaning. "Zurich packet 2913, just for digits. but they landed like ATHUNDERCLAP. His breath caught in his chest, hands trembling. He snapped a photo and slipped the planner into his bag. A rustle whispered behind him. He turned nothing. The hallway lay empty, lit only by flickering fluorescence. Still, the air shifted around him, as though unseen eyes were watching. He left quietly, the weight of the note thudding against his chest with every step. That night, Jacob sat at the kitchen table, the sticky note laid in front of him like an artifact of prophecy. The glow from his laptop cast long shadows across his lined face. Exhaustion etched deep into the corners of his eyes. Locker number, he murmured. Private courier, secure storage unit. He searched every combination of the words, chasing meaning through digital tunnels until Hooray Logistics, international document handling, Zurich-based lockers, secure, discreet, controlled. He leaned back, the realization clicking into place like a puzzle piece. Gotcha. Tiny feet padded into the room. Emma. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, curls matted to one side. Daddy. He turned to her, smiling through the ache in his chest. Hey, sweet pea, can't sleep, she mumbled. You're thinking aloud again. Jacob chuckled and lifted her onto his lap. She curled into him, the soft thump of her heartbeat, sensing with his. Did you stop the bad guys yet? She whispered. Not yet, he said softly, but I found where they're hiding. Her eyelids fluttered. That's 'cause you see things other people don't. He kissed the crown of her head. That's because I come from the floor up. And as the world beyond them exhaled into the hush of 3 a.m., Jacob stared at the note again. Somewhere in this city, a locker waited holding not just secrets, but truth and tomorrow. He'd unlock it. The sky over Jersey City brooded and bruised. Grays, clouds swollen with unspent rain. Across the street stood a squat, indifferent building. Hooray Logistics. It looked like a tombstone for forgotten truths. The rusted sign hung crooked, the foyer pockmarked with years of neglect. Jacob's fingers clenched a slip of paper in his coat pocket. 2913. Paul Temple's handwriting, deliberate and certain. One code, one locker, one shot to tilt the scales. Of justice. Inside, the lobby was dim and soulless, a bell clanging weakly overhead. The air reeked of cold coffee and the stale breath of documents no one read. A receptionist emerged, barely older than a college intern, disinterested, chewing gum like it had wronged her. You got an appointment, just picking up something. Locker 2913, Jacob replied, placing the sticky note on the counter. She eyed him. ID, he handed over his license. You don't look like a Paul Temple. I'm not, he said calmly. Emergency retrieval. Call Stormtech. They'll confirm. She studied him like a cat sizing up a threadbare mouse, then, with a shrug, tapped at her keyboard. Well, it's still active. Last deposit, 8 weeks ago. No retrieval since. She slid a small silver key across the counter. Second row, left side. Don't lose it. $80 if you do. Jacob offered a nod and disappeared down the cold concrete corridor. The lockers loomed like iron coffins, silent, anonymous, their doors sealed against the world. He found 1913. The key turned with a dry groan. Inside, a manila envelope sat alone, sealed with red wax dot at its center, a single letter, L. Jacob's stomach twisted. Lie. He slipped the envelope into his coat and walked out into the waiting storm. He didn't remove his coat, didn't pause for coffee or breath. He sat at the kitchen table, lit by the overcast gray leaking through the window. Alone. With trembling fingers. He cracked the wax seal, peeling it back like the skin of a long-healed scar. Inside, a confidential memo, a USB drive. The memo bore the stamp of Alter Holdings, internal. Jacob read it once. Then again, his pulse roared in his ears. It was from Martin Lai's general counsel, addressed to Alter's executive board, a roadmap for corporate assassination. The words were clinical, cold, deceptively clean. Step 1, private equity pressure. Step 2, insert modified clauses through offshore routing. Step 3, Trigger litigation under breach of transparency. Step 4. Force a public narrative of misconduct. In the margins. Control optics. Control perception. Control outcome. They weren't just framing Vivian Storm. They had budgeted to destroy her. Projected gain from litigation tension, $23.4 million. They planned to profit off her fall. That evening, Jacob stood at Vivian's door, a brownstone tucked away in Midtown, its bricks whispering stories of entrance. She opened it herself, no makeup, hair loose, clad in a simple charcoal sweater, the armor of CEO gone. What remained was the woman underneath. She didn't ask why. He'd come. She just stepped aside. He laid the memo on her kitchen table. She read it, page by page. Her fingers trembled. Her eyes didn't blink. When she looked up, her voice was dust and fire. Where did you get this? Jacob met her gaze. A locker, Paul Temple's, sealed with laz wax. She sank into a chair. There's more, Jacob said, placing the USB beside the papers. Spreadsheets, emails. They've been scripting this collapse for months. Vivian swallowed hard, eyes brimming. They were going to buy my silence with my own ruin. Jacob sat across from her. Not if we speak louder. She looked at him, then really looked. Past the janitor, past the grief. You know what this means? She asked. Yeah. He said, it means we're not playing defense anymore. Sleep evaded him that night, so Jacob picked up a phone he hadn't touched in years. Reggie, he said. A voice answered, gravelly and sharp. Lane, as in. Jacob used to quote federal rulings like hymns. Lane. Jacob laughed quietly. I need a favor. Fantasy football picks, or the kind that lands me on a subpoena list. The second one. A pause. Diner on 82nd. Tomorrow morning. Bring whatever's got you sounding like a man about to set fire to the truth. Over. Eggs and pancakes. Reggie, now a firebrand journalist, sifted through the memo and digital files. Holy hell, he whispered. This isn't just fraud. This is engineered implosion. Weaponized failure. Jacob nodded. It lands next week. They'll bury this. If Lie disappears or one exec takes a vacation in the Caymans, it vanishes under NDA letters. That's why I need you to dig. Quiet. Deep. I need independent chain of custody. Otherwise, they'll tear it apart in court. Reggie leaned back. You're stepping into a storm. Jacob sipped his coffee. Good thing I know how to mop up after. 1. Outside the diner. Cold wind scraped across the pavement. Jacob looked up at the glass skyline. Behind those panes, behind every polished suit, men stitched lies with scalpel precision. But now the truth had weight. And Jacob Lane, janitor. Father. Witness was done sweeping around the mess. He was going to drag it into the light. Are you sure about this? Vivian asked, her voice taut as piano wire. They were in the courthouse prep room. Her heels clicked softly against tile, but the words cracked louder than thunder. Jacob turned from the mirror. You asked why I was doing this. She nodded. I'm doing it because if I stay silent, if I let them win, I'm telling my daughter the truth only matters if the right person says it out loud. He paused, and I'm not raising her in that kind of world. Her expression shifted, softened by truth. She stepped closer. They'll try to discredit you, she said gently. Make you look like some janitor who got lucky. Jacob smiled. Let them. Why? Because I didn't stumble. I paid attention, and that scares them more than they'll admit. Court resumed. The judge entered. Reporters packed the gallery like scavengers at a wake. Jacob Lane took the stand. Prosecutor Marshall Kent smiled with the precision of a scalpel. You're a janitor, correct? Yes, sir. How long have you worked at StormTech? 3 years. 8 months, and in that time, you cleaned floors? I also cleaned up the mess this courtroom is built on. A ripple of laughter. The judge's gavel brought silence. You expect us to believe that while mopping, you uncovered a multi-million-dollar conspiracy? No. I expect you to understand that while everyone else looked past the janitor, I was the only one who noticed when the signatures didn't match. Kent blinked. You're not a lawyer, are you? I was. Past the bar in '06. Life had other plans. The courtroom shifted. The energy crackled, and despite all that, you uncovered this? Jacob leaned forward. You'd be surprised what a man can see when no one's watching. Vivian, sitting beside her attorney, remained still, but her fingers curled into a fist. Doc Kemp pressed harder. What proof do you have this memo wasn't planted? Time-stamped photos, locker logs, metadata from every document. This paper trail doesn't wander at traps, and it caught the ones who thought they were untouchable. Are you accusing Alter Holdings of? I'm accusing them of building a slide and greasing it with men like Paul Temple. Silence. Vivian's lawyer rose. Mr. Lane, you said life had other plans. What did you mean? Jacob looked at Vivian. I used to believe justice wore a suit, that it spoke only from podiums and law books. But when my wife died, and my daughter had no one left, I chose her. A pause. His voice broke. Then rebuilt itself. But justice doesn't care what you wear. It only cares whether you show up. And you showed up. I did. Why? Jacob looked at Vivian. Because she didn't just build a company. She built something worth saving. And with those words, the courtroom fell quiet, not with doubt, but with the steady, dawning weight of truth. She had built something my daughter believed in. Not just a company. Not just a logo on a glass tower, but a legacy, fierce and unyielding. A woman at the helm. A woman who didn't blink. And I refused to stand by while her name was dragged through the mire simply because someone thought a woman like her wouldn't be missed. The lawyer gave a slight nod and stepped aside. Jacob rose from the witness stand, his voice steady, but echoing with something greater than volume. I may mop floors, he said, lifting his chin, but today I cleaned up something bigger. Then he stepped down. No applause followed, but the hush in the room thundered louder than any ovation ever could. Outside, under a sky swollen with unshed rain, Jacob stood still, letting the cool air fill his lungs. The courthouse steps behind him seemed distant. Now, that was when Vivian appeared beside him. You just rewrote the entire rhythm of this case, she said quietly. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. I just told the truth. She hesitated. What did you mean? About me being someone your daughter believed in. He turned toward her, eyes softer now. One night, Emma saw you on TV. She asked if girls could be bosses too. I told her you didn't wait for permission. Vivian blinked. A flicker of something bright passed through her gaze, then disappeared like light through cloud. I owe you more than I can say, she whispered. You don't owe me, Jacob said gently. Just win. And when you do, don't forget who. They tried to erase. She stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing not just in space, but in understanding. What if I don't want to forget you? He met her gaze. The moment stretched between breath and heartbeat. That's not something you say, he said quietly, unless you mean to follow through. I do, she replied, no tremor in her voice. A single raindrop touched her shoulder, then another, and beneath the hush of a New York rainstorm, the two stood no longer boss and janitor, not symbols of class or power, but simply man and woman, side by side, anchored by truth. The verdict hadn't yet been delivered, but something vital had already shifted. Inside Stormtech's once-gold lobby, the place where side eyes and silenced, laughter used to echo against marble walls, Jacob Lane walked through with his mop in hand and changed, yet entirely different. This time, no one looked away, no smirks, no hushed ridicule, only eyes that held a quiet recognition. Hey, Mr. Lane, a young intern called softly from the reception desk. My dad saw you on the news. He said he wishes someone like you worked at his company. Jacob smiled with a humility that couldn't be faked. Tell him I'll send my resume. She grinned, and he walked on. On the 31st floor, Vivian stood, with her back to the room, gazing out at the skyline, her reflection ghosting faintly in the glass. Her hair was still tied up, but a few strands had fallen in unintentional rebellion against the image of invulnerability she used to wear like armor. He knocked gently. I used to think power meant being 10 steps ahead, she said, not turning. But now, I think it's knowing when to stop and really look around. Jacob stepped inside quietly. leaning his mop against the wall. I should have seen it sooner, she continued, finally facing him. Paul, the board, the pressure, it was rust in the joints, but I kept pushing forward, because slowing down meant I'd have to hear the doubt. He moved closer. Sometimes we chase survival so hard, he said, we forget to ask if we're still whole. She laughed dry and brittle. You're full of these poetic gut punches. You know that? I've had a lot of quiet nights to rehearse them. A beat of silence fell between them, filled only by the hum of the city. What happens if we? When, she asked, his answer was immediate. You rebuild. Better. Slower. Maybe. But with your eyes open, and if we lose, he held her gaze, unwavering. You still rebuild. Because they can take your name off a building, but they can't erase what you've already built inside people. Vivian walked to her desk and pulled open a drawer. Inside was a photograph, edges worn soft with time. In it, a younger version of herself, mid-20s, standing proudly in front of a warehouse, a rolled-up blueprint in one hand and fire in her eyes. I was terrified. That day, she murmured, but I smiled like I owned the whole world. Jacob leaned in, his voice low. Maybe that's because part of you already did. She looked at him, not with gratitude, not even with affection, but with a deep, raw recognition. I don't know what this is, she said softly, but I know it's rare, and whatever we're walking toward, I'm done running from it. He drew a breath, the air thick with something unsaid. Neither am I. Before more could pass between them, her assistant tapped on the glass. Miss Storm, she said, they're ready for closing statements. Vivian nodded. As she passed Jacob, she paused. Will you be there? I wouldn't miss it. She walked out, leaving behind the faint set of jasmine and iron resolve. The courtroom was packed. The tension was not electric, but suffocating, like the air before a storm breaks. Vivian's attorney stood, calm and sure. You've heard the arguments, he began. You've read the documents. But more than that, you've witnessed a woman's character tested in fire. He gestured to Vivian. She is not flawless. She's made hard choices. She's dared to lead boldly. But she is not on trial because she lied. She is on trial because she trusted. He walked the length of the jury box, his voice steady, and in that trust, someone found a way and used her name as a weapon. But it was her belief in others that built this company. And you heard from a man, no title, no advantage, who stood up with nothing more than a mop, a daughter, and a conviction that truth matters more than status. Eyes turned to Jacob, seated quietly in the back row. He did not move. You can't fake integrity. You can't Photoshop courage. You can't manufacture loyalty. These things are lived every day by people like Vivian Storm and by people like Jacob Lane. He paused, letting the silence settle. So today, you don't just decide a verdict. You decide whether we still live in a world where character matters more than conspiracy. Then came the judge's instructions, and the courtroom emptied once again. Outside, clouds threatened but still held their rain. Jacob found Vivian near the courthouse pillar, her silhouette strong but still. You okay? He asked gently. No, she replied, but maybe that's the most honest answer I've given myself in months. He stood beside her, close enough to feel her presence, but not evade it. I keep thinking, she murmured, about all the things I didn't say to the board, to Paul, to myself, to you. He looked at her, then say them now. She turned toward him, defiant in her exhaustion. I was raised to believe vulnerability got you eaten alive, but now I think hiding it eats you from the inside first. He nodded. I don't know what happens tomorrow, she said, but I do know this. You didn't just mop the floor, Jacob. You wiped the lies off my mirror. The words landed with weight. He didn't speak right away. Then finally, softly, and you reminded me I'm still more than what I had to become to people once. On opposite ends of a glass tower, now stood with no walls between them, and still. The rain held off. Hours passed. 6 of them, long enough for reporters to grow restless, for coffee to turn bitter in paper cups, for Jacob's nerves to unravel like threadbare cloth. He sat in the courthouse atrium, staring out through a wall of glass into the stillness of a city that seemed to be holding its breath with him. Beside him, Emma's small hand wrapped around his. "I want to be here," she had said, "when the good guys win." He hadn't the heart to tell her that good guys didn't always win. Vivian had stayed upstairs since the jury retired, likely pacing, rehearsing speeches for every outcome. Jacob had none. Just this moment, this stillness. His phone buzzed. They're back. The courtroom filled slowly, carefully as if fate could still be altered by a wrong breath. Vivian walked in, stripped of pretense. No makeup, no jewelry, just a navy suit and eyes that had stopped, hiding their fatigue. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked at Jacob, and he nodded. Whatever came next, they were in it together. The judge spoke. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? A woman in her early 50s stood strong, steady. "We have, Your Honor." The envelope passed. Time thickened. Vivian didn't flinch. Jacob didn't blink. In the matter of Stormtech Industries versus Alter Holdings, the judge paused. "We find in favor of the defendant, Miss Vivian Storm." The room gasped. A stunned kind of justice. Not loud, but profound. Vivian closed her eyes. Jacob exhaled. Emma whispered, "They believe you." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. They believed her. Outside, flashes from cameras. Reporters shouted. Lawyers traded quiet congratulations. But Vivian stood slightly apart, gathering herself before the world wrote her name in headlines again. "You won," Jacob said. "No," she replied. "We survived." "That's different." He looked at her, really looked and saw it, the cracks in her armor. Not weakness, but truth. "You don't have to be unbreakable anymore," he said. "You just have to be real." A breath escaped her lips, half sob, half laugh. "I don't even remember how to be anything else anymore." He smiled. "Good. That's the version of you worth fighting for." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "My resignation letter," she said. "Wrote it last week in case the verdict went the other way. But now, I want to rebuild. Not alone this time." Jacob's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you asking me to stay on as janitor?" She laughed. "No, I'm asking if you'll help build something new, with me. Not for me." He considered this. "Vivian," he said, voice low, "I've spent years trying to raise a daughter who believes she can do anything. I think working beside someone who proves it might be the best place to start." They shared a look, a silent vow deeper than any signature. She added softly, "I don't think I could do this without you anymore." He touched her arm gently. "You never had to." That night, Stormtech shimmered like a lighthouse against the darkened sky. Outside the executive floor, Jacob crossed paths with Margot, the senior admin who once averted her eyes when he walked into a room. She looked at him now, eyes full of quiet respect. "You know," she said, "my son watched your testimony. He's 17. Wants to be a lawyer now." Jacob chuckled. "Tell him to read more, assume less." She smiled. "He already printed your quote and taped it above his desk." "What quote?" Margaret's eyes twinkled. "Justice doesn't care where you stand. It only cares whether you show up." Jacob blinked, caught somewhere between disbelief and quiet awe. "I said you did," she had told him. Then, without flourish or further explanation, Vivian turned and walked away, leaving Jacob standing amidst the echoes of her words. Something in him stirred, part wonder, part pride, and something deeper still, humility. The kind earned in silence, through storms. That night, long after the clatter of heels had faded and office lights dimmed to a soft glow, Vivian stepped into her private conference room. Jacob was there, as he always was, stacking chairs with the same quiet reverence he brought to everything. Not because anyone asked him to, but because that's who he was. A man who tittied the edges of chaos. "Hey," she said softly. He looked up, surprised but not startled. She held his gaze with that rare steadiness she reserved for moments that mattered. "I booked us a table," she said. "Quiet place, no press, just to people who walked through hell and somehow made it out alive." He tilted his head. amused. Sounds suspiciously like a date. She shrugged, the faintest curve of a smile at her lips. Not corporate, not guarded, but human, only if we survive dessert. He smiled. She paused in the doorway, then turned back. Jacob, what you did, it wasn't just for me. I know that now. It reminded people that they matter, even the ones nobody sees. Jacob's voice was calm, unwavering. Sometimes the people nobody sees are the ones holding up the whole damn building, and they walked out together, not as CEO and janitor, not as accused and defender, but simply as the people, cracked open by truth and quietly beginning something new. The restaurant was dim and reverent, not empty, but hushed, the kind of silence that honored the presence of people who had survived something. Warm light spilled like honey across the polished mahogany tables. A saxophone murmured low in the background, smooth and slow. No cameras, no whispers, just two souls who had walked through fire and emerged not unscarred, but unbroken. Vivian sat across from Jacob, her tailored blazer draped over the back of her chair. The sleeves of her blouse were rolled up to her elbows, skin bare, armor shed. Her hair, usually a crown of careful pins, now fell freely, like a curtain softened by wind. She didn't look like a titan of tech. She looked like the girl from that old blueprint photo, the one with the fire in her eyes. Not yet dulled by the weight of success, Jacob, in a clean but humble button-down, looked every bit the man who had once mopped marble floors and scrubbed away scandal. And yet tonight, there was something steadier in him, a stillness, a quiet earned only after chaos. The menus lay closed. Neither had ordered yet. You know, Vivian said, swirling the water in her glass. I don't remember the last time I sat at a table without feeling like I had to perform. Jacob leaned back. Maybe you were always at the wrong table. She smiled at that, soft and real. So, this is the right one? I don't know, he said, lips twitching lest he have the bread taste first. She laughed, not the clipped, polished laugh she used at galas, but something deeper. She tilted her head back, and for a moment, she was just Vivian, not a brand, not a CEO, a woman, fully alive. Silence followed, not awkward, earned. I watched the footage again, she said, voice quiet. Your testimony. You didn't just defend me, Jacob. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He met her gaze. What was that? That I was never alone. I just convinced myself I had to be. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, alone feels safe, but it's not where healing happens. She nodded. I was raised to believe strength looked like control, distance, command. Vulnerability was a liability. Softest guy you cut. And now, I think softness is strength. The kind that bends, but doesn't break. Jacob stirred his water with the straw, then looked her straight in the eye. You know what Emma asked me the other night? What? She said, Daddy, do you think Miss Storm is a hero? Vivian's smile was faint, almost disbelieving. And what did you say? I said heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear power suits, make impossible decisions, and still sleep with guilt. She looked down, her eyes glinting. But real heroes, he continued, they face the mirror after the storm, and they keep building. She looked up, gaze steady. What about you, Jacob? You think you're a hero? No, he said simply. I think I'm just a man who didn't look away. That hit her harder than she expected. The food arrived. They didn't touch it right away. There was something sacred in the space between them. Finally, she asked, what happened after your wife died? I mean, really? Jacob took a breath, deep and measured. After the funeral, the world went silent. The phone stopped ringing. The casseroles stopped coming. Grief is a crowded room that empties fast. I had a daughter who cried for her mom in her sleep, and a heart that didn't know how to beat without her beside me. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I cleaned toilets, fixed sinks, read bedtime stories, and I kept my promise that I wouldn't let the world turn her cold. Vivian didn't say anything for a while. You don't get a medal for that, He added, "But you get something better." Her smile in the morning. She swallowed hard. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if things had gone differently?" Jacob looked out the window. The city beyond shimmered like stardust caught in glass. "Yeah," he said, "but then I think, if life hadn't broken the way it did, I wouldn't be sitting across from a woman who walked through fire and remembered how to glow." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Vivian reached across the table, tentative fingers reaching, searching. Jacob didn't hesitate. He met her halfway. Their hands rested together, not desperate, not theatrical, just present. And that was enough. "I don't want to go back to being untouchable," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "I'm scared. So am I, but I want to try." Jacob's smile was soft. "That's the bravest thing you've said all week." They didn't kiss. They didn't confess anything. They simply held hands in a quiet restaurant. To battle-worn hearts giving themselves permission to hope. Sometimes love begins not in firework displays, but in quiet choices no one sees. When the waiter returned, they didn't let go. They just ordered dessert. Together, Jacob's apartment was quiet. Emma lay curled up on the couch, asleep, her head resting on a worn copy of The Little Prince. Her STEM kit lay scattered nearby, blue LEDs blinking softly like little stars. The world outside was dark, but peaceful. For the first time in months, peace didn't feel out of reach. Vivian sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in one of Jacob's spare hoodies. Her silk blouse had met its match during dessert, and somehow the hoodie, oversized, faded, made the whole apartment feel warmer, more real. Jacob hummed at the sink, washing dishes with the ease of a man who had long found rhythm and repetition. His movements were calm, unhurried, full of purpose. He made peace with the ordinary, and it made peace with him. "She's brilliant," Vivian said softly, nodding toward Emma. "She gets that from her mom," Jacob said. "But the stubbornness, oh me." Vivian smiled. "She asked me if I liked poetry tonight." That made him pause. "She did." Vivian nodded. "Said you read to her sometimes, even in German?" Jacob chuckled. "Only the one she picks. Her mother was fluent. I just memorized the translations." "Do you remember any?" He hesitated, then crossed the room, retrieving a weather journal. He flipped it open, then knelt beside Emma's kit, gently. He lifted a handwritten translation, Liebe ist Sand. He read aloud. Vivian repeated, quietly, "Love is not what you say, it's what you do." Jacob nodded. "That line's been following me for years. Do you still believe it?" He looked at her. "I don't just believe it. I live by it." Silence again, but it pulsed with things unsaid, gratitude, longing, truths too heavy to speak aloud. Vivian stood, her bare feet whispering across the floor. She walked toward him slowly, hands relaxed, eyes vulnerable. "You changed me, Jacob." He tilted his head. "How?" "I used to think strength meant walls, command, silence. But your silence, it wasn't empty. It held things, patience, truth, grace. You didn't try to save me. You just stood beside me and let me save myself." Jacob's throat tightened. "I never wanted to fix you," he said. "I just didn't want you to forget who you were." She stepped closer, resting her hand gently over his heart. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I want to find out." He placed his hand over hers. "Then let's not rush it. Let it breathe. Let it grow." Tears welled in her eyes. "But they didn't break her. You really are the slowest, most patient man I've ever met. And you," he said, grinning, "are the fastest storm I've ever survived." She laughed, head resting on his shoulder, and there, in a modest kitchen filled with blinking LEDs, a sleeping child and the scent of chamomile tea, they stood. No promises, no confessions, just presence. And that was everything. Later that night, after Vivian left with a whispered goodbye and a promise to call, Jacob lifted Emma gently into his arms. She stirred but didn't wake. "Daddy," she murmured. "Yeah, sweetheart, do you think Miss Storm is going to be part of our story?" Jacob brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. I think, he said softly, she already is. Emma smiled in her sleep. Jacob lingered beside her bed, watching her breathe in peace. Then he turned off the light and whispered into the dark, love is not what you say, it's what you do. And tonight, that truth had come home. 3 months later, the Storm Tech lobby was filled not with silence or suspicion, but with laughter, real, unforced, whole, the laughter of people who had survived collapse and were now watching something new rise from the rubble. The windows were open, the walls breathed, light poured in, the brass plaque beneath the company name read, a place where everyone matters. Vivian stood at the welcome desk, greeting families as they poured in for the first ever open house. Emma's idea. Kids played with lab kits. Engineers answered questions from wide-eyed parents. No hierarchy, no titles, just people. Jacob adjusted a display table. Emma, junior STEM captain badge gleaming on her hoodie, stood proudly beside him, full of questions, full of light. Hey, Dad, she whispered. Is it true Miss Storm used to run meetings where no one could talk unless they were called on? Jacob chuckled. Let's just say things have changed. Emma beamed. She smiles more now. She does, Jacob said, watching Vivian laugh across the room. And in that moment, everything, the pain, the silence, the rebuilding, made sense. Because this was what love looked like when it finally came home. Asterisk, he said yes. And so, did she die just then? Vivian appeared, her presence effortlessly graceful, carrying the cups of coffee. One black, one creamy, rich, and exactly the way Jacob liked it. For the man who arranged an entire display table like a 5-star general, she teased, handing him his drink with a smirk that held old memories and unspoken gratitude. Jacob raised an eyebrow, amused. I thought CEOs didn't run coffee errands. Vivian's smile softened into something gentler, more human. I'm not a CEO today, she said. I'm just Vivian. Emma, perched nearby, looked up and blinked with surprise. You remembered how I like mine, half chocolate, half coffee, with a hint of cinnamon. No judgment, Vivian replied with a playful wink. Emma lit up, beaming as she took her first sip. Around them, children tinkered with gadgets, their laughter echoing through the room like music finally returning to a long silent hall. The air felt lighter now, as if someone had finally exhaled after holding their breath for too long. Then, Vivian's voice gently sliced through the hum of the room. Do you remember the first time we spoke? Jacob glanced sideways. You mean the day you nearly fired me? She laughed, a sound that carried the weight of past regrets and present clarity. The day I dismissed your warning. You were pointing at a painting. I thought you were pointing at nothing. Jacob sipped his coffee, thoughtful. You weren't ready to see it. She studied him, and now he met her gaze without flinching. I think you see everything a little clearer, she said softly. Vivian nodded. It's strange. I've spent years building a world made of glass walls, but I never looked out of them. Not until someone cleaned them. Jacob smiled, a warm, quiet smile that carried years of pain, healing, and everything in between. Clean windows changed everything. Time seemed to pause. Around them, people moved, talked, laughed, but the space between Jacob and Vivian felt still, steady, like it had been forged, not found. Something earned, something real. Vivian's eyes drifted to Emma, who was now animatedly explaining Newton's laws to a group of captivated interns. Her voice rang with confidence, her gestures full of life. You raised her right, Vivian whispered. Jacob's voice cracked just slightly, but the softness in it was unmistakable. She saved me. I just held the flashlight. Vivian turned toward him fully now. Her guard was down, her voice stripped of all pretense. I don't know where this road leads, Jacob. I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't even know if this us has a name yet. He didn't hesitate, not even for a breath. Some of the best things in life don't start with a name, he said. They start with a choice. She looked into his eyes, and in that look was every wall she'd ever built, every fear she'd ever wrestled with, slowly dissolving. Then, I choose this, she said quietly. I do. He replied, They didn't kiss. Not yet. It wasn't needed. Instead, Vivian took his hand not for show, not to make a point, but because it felt right. Because the moment had arrived. Because some connections don't demand grand declarations, they simply ask you to stay. And across the room, Emma saw it. She didn't giggle. She didn't tease. She just smiled to herself, nodded, and turned back to her demo. Because even a child knows when something broken has finally been made whole. Later that afternoon, when the last guest had trickled out and the office had returned to its familiar hum, Jacob found himself alone in the lobby. He drifted toward the new glass panel by the entrance and unassuming addition. That had become something sacred. Over the past few weeks, employees had quietly signed it, not with job titles, but with truths. Why they stayed. He leaned in to read them because this place believes in second chances. Because someone saw me. Because silence can be healing, too. Jacob stood there for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a marker, and uncapped it slowly. He pressed it gently to the glass and wrote, "Because love is not what you say, it's what you do." The cap clicked shut with a soft finality. He stepped back, breathing deeply. Vivian appeared beside him like a quiet answer to a long-asked question. She read his words carefully, as if memorizing them. "Will you ever stop quoting that poem?" She teased. "Not a chance," he said with a smile. She leaned against his shoulder, resting there not out of fatigue, but out of trust. "Then let's keep writing our own," she whispered. Outside, the sun had begun its descent, spilling golden light across the glass entrance like a blessing. Inside, there were no more storms, no more walls made of fear and glass. Only calm, only hope, only love, quiet, constant, and unmistakably earned. And in the end, perhaps healing doesn't always arrive wrapped in dramatic gestures or tearful goodbyes. Sometimes it comes simply when someone refuses to walk away when it matters most. If this story touched something tender in you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Tell me your city, your country, what part of the story stayed with you the longest? What line whispered to your soul? And if your heart aches for more stories like this of quiet heroes, second chances, and the kind of love that repairs rather than rescues, tap that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who might need it today. A little hope can go a long way. Thank you for being here.